Welcome to Strictly Facts, a guide to Caribbean history and culture, hosted by me, Alexandria Miller. Strictly Facts teaches the history, politics, and activism of the Caribbean and connects these themes to contemporary music and popular culture. Welcome, people. Welcome back to another episode of Strictly Facts, a guide to Caribbean history and culture. I was thinking recently about fashion, especially in light of Jamaican-American Cheryl Lee Ralph's win at the Emmys earlier this year, and somehow I started naming designers from the Caribbean and of Caribbean descent. These thoughts led to me thinking broadly about fashion and the different ways we as a region have shaped and influenced fashion globally. So naturally, I brought these thoughts to you all, my Strictly Facts family. How often have you thought about fashion as integral to our culture's widespread notoriety? We're here today to get into it a little bit and are joined by Alcot Laing, the man behind one of my favorite fashion brands, Rice and Teas. Alcott, it's so great to have you. Feel free to share with our listeners your connection to the region and how you got interested in Caribbean fashion culture.
Awesome. Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be on your show. Love the platform. A little bit about Rice and Teas. Well, we're a Caribbean inspired apparel line. We definitely specialize in t-shirts and we carry other items as well. We have swimwear, athleisure, bags, artwork, you name it, but definitely t-shirts, that's our forte. I refer to myself as a t-shirt Don Dada.
Representing Spanish Town at that, you have to big up the place, what you mean?
Oh, right. So yeah, definitely those Spanish Town born. I was raised partially in Canada, in like Toronto, Brampton area, and also in Florida. I actually graduated from Florida A&M, and currently I reside in Atlanta, Georgia. I'm a serial entrepreneur, and I had another clothing line that was, again, it was lifestyle oriented, but it was off of a hobby, sporting hobby, specifically mixed martial arts, Brazilian jiu-jitsu. And I ended up doing some designs and I was incorporating a lot of my Caribbean heritage in the design. And it wasn't resonating as much with that community. So I just decided to kind of just pivot and just start pushing towards where my instincts were taking me anyway. And that kind of brought about Rice and Teas. But the brand itself, its identity, the message behind it was really inspired definitely by the culture and also by the women in my family and in the Caribbean culture as a whole. We coined the phrase, trademarked the phrase, bad gal things. And that's like one of our more popular lines. And it's really geared at like female empowerment and kind of celebrating Caribbean women and their beauty and their strength and kind of like putting the whole bad gal definition into context and controlling the narrative.
I have gotten several compliments and several remarks when I wear my shirts, but we'll talk more about that in a moment. Again, to just bring everything back into context. So we had an earlier episode when we were talking about the madras cloth, and what some would consider, traditional Caribbean apparel or Caribbean fashion. And so I have been, always really interested in also looking at that, but then also pairing this lens with more contemporary stuff. And so, how have you really seen the evolution of our fashion, particularly since, the 20th century moving forward?
It's definitely gone a lot more mainstream. I always joke, say, we've been wearing less because, the madra cloth, they were more, fully garbed, fully clothed. And now, a lot of our fashion, scantily clad, close fitting, a little risque. But I think overall, Caribbean fashion has kind of just assimilated into mainstream fashion because you have high end Caribbean fashion designers making pieces that are worn at the Oscars, at the Met Gala, and those places. And I just think we're seeing a lot of that where we're kind of at the table and doing what a lot of the bigger brands are doing right now. So I think Caribbean fashion is really kind of just blending in with your traditional fashion at all levels, whether it's streetwear, high fashion, accessories, and so forth.
Definitely. And I think, especially to some degree, even that some of our early fashions, right? So I'm thinking that early to mid 20th century in particular, were really defined by the influence of the like quote unquote world powers and colonialism. So, we've always been migrating. So thinking of people traveling, or being sent clothes, barrel culture, etc. There are
Yeah,
have always been these ways that um foreign clothes, to put it in that way, have been always sort of replicated in the Caribbean, but also there are a lot of images of, I guess, decolonization in very particular ways. So, like, a few for me that I really think of. So, there was a moment, especially during like the Harlem Renaissance and a little bit even pushing forward into the 40s, Caribbean men start wearing the zoot suits. And so if you're unfamiliar with the zoot suits, they were these like really long jackets and wide leg trousers that were sort of popularized by African American musicians, jazz players, etc. And I think,
yeah.
if you right, and it's literally became a thing throughout the Caribbean. There was this particular term for it in Trinidad and Tobago where they were dubbed the Saga Boys. And so I was reading about it a bit, and scholar Harvey R. Neptune writes about the Saga Boys as using the zoot suits to improve their lives and challenge imperialism, which I thought was really intricate. And so I think there are ways that um US culture, foreign culture, whoever's whatever, outside of the Caribbean you want to frame it as, it can be seen sometimes as like taking away from who we are, but there are also a lot of intricate ways that we have sort of redefined it to do our own thing in a lot of very particular ways as well.
I think our people, we've always been, clean, clean to a step. Right, it's the zoot suits, the Clarks, the diamond socks. Always, well presented. Well wrapped package. It's definitely deep rooted part of our culture. Just looking good and standing out. I think we just have a flair for how we wear things because we're very very GQ esque for really as long as I can remember, honestly, to some degree. Right, we've always like embraced that cleanliness and being neat. We've never been like a sloppy culture when it comes to dressing.
And also like paralleling that point with like functionality, right? I mean, if you're living in the Caribbean, it's a tropical climate. And so I even also think of, to your point about being clean, but and fashionable. The Kariba suit for me is also one that stands out. So the Kariba suit was designed by Jamaican designer Ivy Ralph, who's the mother of Cheryl Lee Ralph, who everybody has been talking a lot about recently with the Abbott Elementary winning awards, etc. But it was a suit worn without a, shirt and tie, which I think, to me represents that like sort of colonial back and forth thing that we were talking about earlier. But also like
Yeah,
it's hot. It doesn't seem functional to me to be wearing a suit and tie and all of these things in such a tropical climate. And it was also a nod to Africa because it was sort of like a nuanced version of what I believe Ivy Ralph described as the safari jacket or safari shirt, and really became popular amongst several politicians across the region. Even earned Ralph the Order of Distinction for the promotion of fashion in 1999. So there are always these like conscious ways that we're like, all right, in the midst of being fresh, in the midst of being
yeah.
zandadas, right? We also need to like think about what we have to do functionally. And so Manly really popularizes this suit and even writes about the fact of having to like wear this suit and tie as the first act of psychological surrender to colonial trauma, is what he writes about it in his memoir. And so thinking about how all of these reverberations of fashion, like, it's the practicality, it's looking good, it's also a way to challenge colonialism, which I've always found really special and important about who we are and where we come from.
It is very important. I mean, the absence of a tie, I mean, that speaks volume. As a male, someone who's worked, still working corporate America, and having to wear a tie and having that around your neck, like that's symbolic. I don't know if people like really think about it, like what that implies, or what it can imply, and to to go away from that and is definitely a step away from imperialism and standing up against colonialism via fashion. Well, the Caribbean are very practical, very resourceful. Again, those are the qualities why I just felt the need to do this line. Because it's almost as if, I don't want to toot our own horn because, everyone's going to be biased towards their culture or whatever. But it's almost like Caribbean people have like this superhuman ability, right? And it's ingenuity. And I mean, you can really track it down to just having to do the most with limited resources and just having to find a way because you just don't have like any other option. So that kind of like just breeds this certain level of like just genius, and it just seems almost supernatural. But we've just done so amazing things in terms of just being practical and making things useful that were at our disposal. And then on top of that, making it fashionable. So what would we turn our hand on make fashion?
Always. You mentioned Clark's earlier, and so obviously, as the music nerd that I am, so much of our fashion culture is really heavily tied into our music culture, and which is sort of like ironic to me because our music is so popular across the world that we don't always think of the fashion push behind it. And so, although people may not always point to fashion, how do you think it has had this massive influence on our music culture?
Like the fashion, it drives a lot of the music because the music is supposed to be a reflection of the culture, right? You're supposed to sing about the things that you see, right? The things that you hear, right? So it's definitely given a lot of inspiration to different types of songs, whether obviously, Clark's by Vibes Cartel, songs like Batira by Buju Banton. But even outside of that, just even rapping about singing about like a arrow shirt or, whatever suit well clean and this type of dress, this type of frock or whatever. It's definitely given our music a lot of content to sing about and giving us a lot of visuals, adding this like extra layer of local color to our music. And then on top of that, it's been able to catapult, certain brands, really to like to next levels. Like otherwise successful and established brands were taken to new levels just based on the promotion and celebration that it got from our music.
And I think to your point about Clark's, like we've seen this more in recent years. I believe Clark's did a short YouTube documentary that I'll link in our show notes. But they've been really intentional within the last few years of like reaching out. I think there's the documentary is about Clark's connection to Jamaica. You see a lot of like brand partnerships, which I think is really beautiful now. It's not just, us promoting because we, love a certain brand or whatever, but it's also the brand's recognition of our influence on the growth of their brand as well. In tandem with this point of fashion and music, we oftentimes don't always think about the sort of like livelihood aspect of fashion, right? Especially I think, through dance hall culture. If nobody knows this year is the 25th anniversary since the movie Dance Hall Queen came out. And so there was a
Yeah.
symposium and things online that I was a part of or I had listened in on rather. And there's so many parts of when you're like analyzing Dance Hall Queen and watching that film. But one thing that I had really thought of in this recent viewing that I had was the impact of the designer seamstress who was, you know, corralling, designing Marcia's outfits, right? Her name is slipping me at the moment, but the point is that like so many people have been able to make their stamp on dance hall culture, not necessarily as the dancer, not necessarily as the person, who's on the stage, but also their livelihoods through this ability to be designing these fashions that have become so integral to its recognition as a culture, right? But yeah, that was another point that I was like the way that our fashion permeates throughout um music is just so necessary to its growth and development. It's not just the song, it's not just the artist, but it's also the style as well.
Yeah, and that was part of the ecosystem. That's all, reggae music parties as a whole. It was one big ecosystem. You had from the vendors selling food to the venue
Definitely.
owner renting the venue, the sound man, the person designing the outfits for the artists and for the patrons. It was one big ecosystem, one big economy, and a lot of people, were fed and made a living off of that. And if you really study like some of the designs, I mean, you'll see a lot of these designs or inspirations or other designs that were inspired by said designs on a lot of these, runways today. I promise you watch any of these big name fashion shows and look at some of their runway fashion, and you will see a lot of dancehall influence, just showing us how ahead of our time we were and how impactful our fashion has been over the years. But I definitely love to see it. I wish more would have capitalized on that. Having the same way we have these brand partnerships now with Clarks and so forth. Some of these seamstresses and designers to have these same partnerships with your Gucci's and your Balenciagas and so forth. Because in terms of fashion forward and runway fashion, I mean, they epitomize that.
To that point, right? While we don't necessarily have the most like massive fashion industry, like I don't want to compare it to like a New York Fashion Week or whatever, right? Caribbean fashion, to your point, has certainly made its mark on the world. And so I think, Oscar de la Renta, who was born in the Dominican Republic, um, who else? Grenadian designer Felicia Noel, whose designs have been worn by Beyonce and former First Lady Michelle Obama. Like these are certainly household, names that are from the region. I even saw recently that Brandon Blackwood, who is an accessories designer, Jamaican American accessories designer, is up for the American Accessory Designer of the Year award by the Council of Fashion Designers of America. And so we are constantly revolutionizing and influencing these what are supposed to be the world leaders, right? Or the national and international leaders, rather. But what are your thoughts then on the Caribbean fashion industry and where you see our current fashion trends heading?
I think there's a lot of talent here in the Caribbean. Some of the fashion shows that I've witnessed, just some awesome designs. Even like just going back to the Olympics, I think it was Bob Marley's daughter had designed the outfits for the Jamaica Olympic team. I think during the London Olympics. So
Yeah.
there's tons of opportunity for Caribbean designers to make waves. I think they're just a plethora of talent from swimwear, high fashion, jewelry. I just think they just have an eye for what's stylish at any level. And there's just huge opportunities here, just, as long as it's, presented to them. I would like to see some fashion institutions open up in the Caribbean, more partnerships with some of these fashion houses abroad for students in the Caribbean to study, learn, apprenticeships, and so forth. I definitely want to see more of that. I definitely believe that they have the talent and the eye to do great things in these spaces.
And it's something we've always been doing. I think specifically about Trinidadian like artist designer Althea McNeish, who was really central to the Black British textiles growth and development. She was part of the Caribbean artist movement and even designed fabrics for the official wardrobe for Queen Elizabeth during one of Queen Elizabeth II's, of course, visits to Trinidad. And so, like, we've been doing this thing. I mean, to your point about current fashion trends. So we have our own Caribbean Fashion Week, right? It got started in 2011 and while it may or 2001, sorry. And while it may not be, like New York or Milan, whatever, we are growing and defining our brand in very much the same way that you could even talk about the film industry, which is an episode we have coming up. So don't worry. But yeah, there are just a lot of things to be said. And I think I've been really keeping a mindful eye on how technology has definitely made access and awareness grow a little bit more for our, local designers and diasporic designers as well. I can't believe we didn't talk about this earlier when we were talking about music, but it also made me think about the Caribbean fashion influence on hip hop, right? Before you go deep into fashion, right, there is clearly DJ Cool Herc. There's a clear distinction and influence of the Caribbean on the development of hip hop in New York, particularly, especially, with New York being very much so a hub of Caribbean diaspora. And then when we take it a little bit further and, are trying to describe what the fashion looked like at the time and, how it's moved forward, there are a lot of um, female artists in particular I come to mind for me, but there are so many different layers of how Caribbean fashion has had its mark on hip hop, especially. And so, could you share a bit about what you think about the fashion influence has been on hip hop?
Okay, definitely. It's been very, very, very big. Like you can look at, say, Wu-Tang Clan, the Clark Wallabies again. I mean, they literally had their whole genre style album dedicated to Clark Wallabies. And during that time period, like literally outside of the Caribbean, like there wasn't really anyone that was wearing Clarks like that. They were more into, your Adidas, your Nikes and stuff like that. The Clarks, they were like square toes. I think we could definitely raise our hand in saying that we helped to influence, that movement and that love for that brand. Cool Herc, Grandmaster Flash. He's Bayesian. Yeah, definitely. We always bring our Caribbean flavor to the table. They were pioneers in hip hop, right? The argument's always like who created hip hop and who didn't. But one thing you cannot deny, there's no argument about it. If nothing else, they were pioneers of the genre, right? Because you can't say that they were just there. They were pioneers of the genre. And I definitely think that they brought some of that flavor, some of that confidence and style into hip hop, right? Because hip hop is it's wearing your clothes and it's how you wear your clothes, right? The attitude or the confidence with it, that kind of all balls into one in terms of defining hip hop fashion. And also like even back in like the 90s and stuff like that, that whole cross colors, bright colors kind of movement, you could definitely see a lot of Caribbean influences and a lot of African influences in that style of dress. The damaged jeans with the distressed and the shredding and stuff like that. Definitely a lot of Caribbean influence there as well. And, that kind of like defined hip hop for, a couple decades, honestly. In addition to like other styles like your Polo and Guess and other mainstream designers. But yeah, we definitely had a heavy hand in that whole genre and how they dressed for that time.
This is an aside, by the way. One thing that I have really found interesting about your brand in particular is that it's not just bad gal things, as I mean, beautiful phrasing. And I love the definitions of it, but there's also a very intricate way that you tie history to the fashion that you make. So could you talk about how history has influenced the formation of rice and teas?
I always want to educate, no matter what I'm doing. I have a thing for teaching. I have a love affinity for teaching, and I think that we could definitely be fashionable, but we could also, teach something through fashion. So just history in general, like getting history lessons and people, historical figures that aren't otherwise celebrated as much as I think they should, including them or references to them in our line. That was something that was very intentional. Like we have a T-shirt that celebrates Nanny Maroon. Again, we call it the Maroon Things T-shirt, and we got Nanny on there in like like a stylish kind of look to her. And again, she kind of represents once again the whole definition of a bad girl, someone who like overcame and conquered like tremendous obstacles to liberate her people. Also, some of our One Blood collection that kind of plays tribute to the lineage and the connection between Africa and the Caribbean, right? Really, that diaspora as a whole, putting that in the form of art. So it's like one of our designs is like Africa, all the countries in Africa, but instead they're all Caribbean flags. So again, pointing to the connection, but it's also like a conversation piece, because if you think about all the people that came from Africa that populated the Caribbean, really everyone that came from Africa populated the world. But just just
Right.
thinking of
That's
that
another
connection,
episode.
right? But it's having that conversation piece. Like people don't realize like the food like aki came from Africa, yams and stuff like that. So many of our flavors, came from over there. So a lot of the colors of our flag is the colors of the Ashanti tribe. A lot of the words that we say in Patois and in Creole and so forth are from Yoruba and Igbo cultures. So being able to depict that in fashion and in art, it provokes conversation. It just encourages you to like dig deeper and talk and learn about your history and appreciate the connection that we have to Africa. And with that said, I would definitely like to take this opportunity, right, to extend my hand and offer to do a giveaway for your listeners. I think spreading the word is like it's huge to me. Like I want people. I think anyone who's from the Caribbean, you should own several articles of clothing from Rice and Tea. Right, that's just like a must. Like you have blue jeans, you need to have several articles of clothing from Rice and Tees. And I would like to take this opportunity to set up a giveaway for your listeners where they could win some of our items. We have some really, really, really amazing products. The stuff you see now, you should see the stuff I have on the horizon. Like I mean, listen, like some next level stuff. Like I'm really taking this Caribbean fashion streetwear to like the next level. When I tell you, like you're gonna put this on with cultural pride. Even if you're not from the Caribbean, if you just like understand Caribbean culture, this is something you're gonna want to wear, and it's like Superman putting on his blue suit with the S on his chest. You're gonna feel that confidence. So I definitely want to set up a giveaway for your audience. So just let me know how you want to do that, and we'll get the ball rolling.
Well, I would love that, and I'm sure our listeners would love that as well. And so, as our final question for this episode, everyone knows my favorite question of Strictly Facts. What are some of your favorite examples of how fashion and history show up in contemporary popular culture?
I really like the fact that we, as the Caribbean, can take these established brands to new heights. The fact that we're able to get regular artists endorsement deals and brand partnerships with these companies like Clark's, right, is absolutely amazing. It's like a Michael Jordan signing with Nike, right? And all this is based on pop culture, our music, popularizing a brand to the level that now the brand wants to reach out to us and form long-standing, lucrative partnerships. And I think this can spill over into other areas because anything we touch, we could grow and multiply it. So I think that's probably my favorite example. Just the fact that, once upon a time, these shoes that were like, I think the first Clark was like a desert boot or something like that. And just the fact that somebody who's a recording artist up and coming can get an endorsement deal for wearing those said shoes. Right? These shoes got names like bank robber and all kind of stuff. All right, we wore them, cleaned them with the toothbrushes, and people can get an actual endorsement deal contract from that, all because of the impact of our culture on that brand. Like that's probably my favorite story overall because it just kind of it's economics. It's putting money in the right people's pockets, and I think that's huge. I'd like to see more ownership of these types of brands that we're kind of putting on the forefront. But this is definitely a great start and a step up. Like who'd have thought back in the day that people will be having these types of deals on the table for these brands.
Beautifully said. Well, Alcott, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and background on Caribbean fashion. I'll be sure to link Rice and Teas in our show notes so listeners can check it out. And I will play with the social media and stuff and figure out how we'll do this giveaway. But I am really excited for our listeners to hopefully be able to cop some Rice and Teas gear, rock it just as I do. As you've said, it is definitely a conversation starter. And so many people have come up to me based off different pieces I've been wearing or have worn. And so to our listeners, we hope you full enjoyed this episode. As always, do us a favor, just a reminder to rate, send us your voice notes and voicemails with family stories because we want to do an upcoming episode. But again, thank you so much to everyone that's been a part of our Strictly Facts journey thus far and little more. Thanks for tuning in to Strictly Facts. Visit strictlyfactspodcast.com for more information from each episode. Follow us at Strictly Facts Pod on Instagram and Facebook, and at Strictly Facts PD on Twitter.